away from. That's not national champions. And many of the lessons, I think, from industrial policy success stories is that you need to have more of a test and learn type of approach. You need to have a plurality of different approaches to supporting capabilities development, where a number may fail, but a number may succeed, and you're willing to review honestly the successes and the failures. If you get captured by a national champion, then that national champion will be able to lobby for anti-dumping protection, higher rates of protection, etc., and corrupt the political process. So what does it mean to engage in this messy test and learn process? And what does this mean for competition and industrial policy? And I think that's the real challenge that most developing countries, as African countries certainly are facing. Very concentrated markets with very large multinational interests who you want to encourage to invest in the country, but you want to make sure that there's that longer-term investment in the capabilities that is taking place at the same time. And it's not just about manufacturing, it's about the bundle of activities around engineering and design, etc. And so you're dealing with these entrenched, powerful interests and trying to work out how your markets are going to be shaped. And those markets are, of course, international and they're regional. So I think there's important moves that are taking place around regional integration, which are very positive in the sense that they open up the potential for wider markets and therefore for bringing together more investment, but together with effective rivalry within those markets. And this is a really big and important agenda for research and for competition if it's going to succeed. It's kind of tried to observe, but cartels operate through dividing markets, and the cement cartel is a well-documented one in Southern Africa. But national competition authorities therefore end up taking excessive pricing cases instead of dealing with a regional cartel, and that's true across a number of markets. So that's a very big challenge for the antitrust fraternity. The U.S. is a complete outlier in this world. I mean, in terms of the size of the economy, and therefore not needing to really deal with the abuse of dominance or entrenched dominance to the same extent as most other countries have to do. So I think we need to be thinking about how to engage with these entrenched oligopolies and dominant firms in developing countries, having an agenda which actually allows to learn from cross-country experiences at a more bringing out the nuances better, and understanding competition as a dynamic process of rivalry, and locating the enforcement within a wider competition policy framework. I think one of the challenges in South Africa is that there's been a lot of attention on the competition law enforcement, and in conferences like this, sometimes talking up the successes, and not thinking about the wider competition policy agenda, which includes a lot of regulatory barriers to entry, for example, which need to be addressed. And just to maybe give a context to this from today's discussion. So when Walmart entered and bought a very small supermarket chain, in actual fact, a tiny supermarket chain, it then faced all of these obligations. We have no policy around retail, how the large retailers engage with suppliers, and that's not going to be a competition law enforcement agenda. That could be a market inquiry, it could be a competition policy agenda, it could be an agenda around urban planning, actually, and around the shape of cities, which I think is the lessons we should be learning from things like the supermarket inquiry in the UK, in actual fact. It is a competition policy, though, a policy agenda around reducing barriers to entry. We don't have a policy framework for any of those things, but we have had Walmart paying this amount of money to develop local suppliers. The two incumbents, large incumbents, have not had to really engage with these questions. The answers are not easy. The question is whether we think the issues are important. I think in the context of what other countries are doing, let me just highlight how Kenya has engaged with some of this entrenched market power in network industries. And I think it's an interesting case because it's kind of counterintuitive in the sense that in Kenya and we do a lot of work. We've actually worked on inquiries in Kenya, so I should highlight it's coming from that place and from hearing and engaging with the authorities there. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to go to court. So you've got the competition authorities essentially will find it very difficult to enforce their decisions. The tribunal, which was the first appellate body, has only started functioning now, 10 years after the law came. So how can competition law enforcement have any impact in this context. At the same time, you have a very dynamic mobile money platform, which has opened up access to financial services across the country, and has, as a result, a higher rate of people with bank accounts than actually South Africa has. But owns the market. It's a utility, in fact. It's so important that you can't do business without this platform. So how do you engage with that? And they've taken a whole series of cases which point out the harm that has been done to the ongoing rivalry and the potential for smaller businesses to interact and interface with that system. And this has happened largely through bringing the cases almost for rhetorical impact. I mean, the newspapers are there's very vocal debates, etc. And at each stage, they have said these are the impacts. This is the divide between the short-term rent extraction that this very dynamic platform is also incentivized to do, of course, and the longer-term impact that it may be having. And a series of concessions and settlements without admissions in cases have occurred. So there is the potential to bring competition values to a public audience, a debate in newspapers, and also companies want to appear to be doing the right thing. So to have, it sounds sort of simplistic, but to essentially shame them through a process of exposition of the impact. And I think that potential is very important, and it's very important for many developing countries in the context of how they're engaging with these debates. So let me just leave you with that as a kind of a thing to chew over going forward with this debate. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's a very interesting exposition of the relationship between competition law and competition policy and industrial policy overlapping in making markets work better. And now we come to Kirti Gupta, and Kirti, you take it on.
Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks for all the organizers. So when we were talking about this panel, and we talked a couple of times, and I was thinking about how to articulate and what points to articulate, and if I were to put a tagline or a topic on it, I would have called it Antitrust Today, Whose Rules and What Standards? And that really articulates the perspective that I'd like to discuss, coming from engineering and economics background, but really from the business side. I grew up in the wireless industry, and I work at Qualcomm. We've had a tad bit of trouble with some agencies around the world lately. So some little experience there, and it gives you this dose of realism that's important to remember in this debate. And frankly, I'd like to start with the first point, which is important for any global business, and they intimately understand which is this proliferation of antitrust agencies worldwide. For the first time, global businesses today are chartering this uncharted territory of global antitrust. And remember that many of these agencies had no antitrust legislation or any enforcement mechanism even just a decade ago. Simply put, although there are 130 plus agencies worldwide, there are not 130 countries with the rule of law. So concurrently, at the same time, there's been this increase in the level of influence of agencies, of antitrust agencies, along with the willingness to reshape markets and also impose decisions within and outside of their sovereign borders. And we have seen these agencies across the world wield a stunningly wide array of enforcement and remedial actions. And that's one world reality that we need to live in when we think of operating global businesses anywhere. And the second, and this is exaggerated by the first problem, is this unclear objectives of antitrust agencies worldwide. And I think we are having this discussion in this room clearly right now. If you ask different agencies, and it's obvious if you ask different people in the room, even, or maybe not after Professor Stiglitz's talk, we get different answers about what is the goal of antitrust agencies, and indeed what should be the goal of antitrust agencies. And, as George clearly explained, the long-standing goal of agencies in the U.S. for